Buckle up, folks, because today we're diving headfirst into a really tough one. We're going to be dissecting the aftermath of this brutal DNA that just tore through Valencia, Spain.
Yeah.
And it left behind, well, just a ton of destruction. Our main source today is a recent article from Levante EMV.
Okay.
They're a major Valencian news outlet.
Yeah.
And let me tell you, it paints a very, very grim picture.
It does. It does. For those maybe not super familiar, a DNA is basically like a supercharged low pressure system. You get just an insane amount of rain in a really short time. They're not that uncommon around there. But this one, well, it was a real doozy.
Doozy is putting it lightly. I mean, we're not talking like, flooded basements here. The Levante EMV article reports at least 51 confirmed deaths, and that's just in the province of Valencia.
Wow.
And get this, they're still out there looking for people. A Guardia civil officer, his girlfriend, and a truck driver all went missing during the storm.
51 confirmed deaths. That's just heavy. And you think about the missing folks, too, and the families they left behind. The scale of it all is just tragic.
Yeah, it's just heartbreaking, honestly.
Yeah.
And beyond the human toll, this DNA basically shut down the entire region. We're talking major highways, the A7 and A3. These are like the main arteries of Spain, totally flooded, impassable.
Yeah.
The port of Valencia, one of the busiest in the Mediterranean, had to close down completely. Yeah. Schools in Valencia City canceled classes, all outdoor activities, poof, gone. They're even setting up emergency shelters. It's just pure chaos over there.
Yeah, it really shows you how these extreme weather events just have these ripple effects that touch everything. You got transportation networks crippled, businesses shut down, people's lives totally upended. And the Port of Valencia, that's like an economic engine for the whole area,
Yeah.
Closing that down, even for a little bit, has huge financial implications.
It's wild. It's really mind-boggling. So with all this devastation and chaos, was there anything good in the article? Any, glimmers of hope? Any stories about people helping each other out?
Yeah, actually, there were quite a few. Even in the darkest times, people find a way to help each other out. The article talked about this couple from Zativa. They had to ditch their car and climb up on the roof of a gas station to escape the rising water.
Wait, what? They had to climb on top of a gas station? That sounds absolutely terrifying.
Yeah, they were driving back from Valencia when the storm hit and the roads got totally flooded. They ended up at this gas station with 15 other people, all huddled together on the roof, just waiting to be rescued.
15 people crammed on a gas station roof in the middle of a massive storm. Talk about a nightmare. So how'd they even get down from there?
All right, this is the crazy part. They were rescued by, wait for it, workers from Valencia's Parks and Gardens Department. Apparently they were already up on the roof for some reason, and they were able to help get everyone down safely.
Parks and Gardens workers, saving the day. Talk about unexpected heroes. You really never know where help might come from in these situations.
Right.
I bet that couple sent those guys a pretty big thank you basket after that. But it makes you think, what if those workers hadn't been there? What if those folks on the roof hadn't been so lucky?
It's a scary thought, yeah. Luck shouldn't be the deciding factor in whether you live or die in a natural disaster, right?
Yeah.
It really highlights how important it is to be prepared to know what to do when these things happen.
Totally. Having a plan, knowing your evacuation routes, understanding the risks of floods, that sort of thing.
Absolutely. And it's not just about being physically prepared either. It's about being mentally prepared, being able to cope with the emotional toll of a disaster.
That's a really good point. Speaking of emotional toll, the article also talked about La Carrera del Basket, that sports complex in Valencia that they turned into a giant emergency shelter. They have something like 130 people there, most of them from towns in Lorta Sud. I can only imagine what those people have been through. It must be so overwhelming to lose everything and have to depend on the kindness of strangers.
Absolutely. The article really paints this picture of fear and exhaustion, just immense loss. But even amidst all that, there's this strong sense of community and support. Volunteers are working nonstop to make sure everyone has food, shelter, and just someone to talk to.
So in a way, this disaster is kind of bringing people together, showing us the power of human connection.
Yeah, I think that's a great observation. Even when faced with tragedy, you see people reaching out, helping each other, offering support. It's like a reminder that even when things are falling apart, there's still hope.
Hope and a whole lot of economic headaches, I imagine. The Levante EMV article mentioned some pretty serious damage to businesses, right?
Yeah, the economic fallout from this DNA is going to be rough. The article quoted Diego Rama. He's the president of FIPIVO, the Federation of Business Parks in the area. He said businesses in the industrial zones are facing massive losses. A lot of them can't even get to their properties yet because of the flooding.
So they're dealing with the damage, but they can't even see how bad it is yet. That's going to be a nightmare for any business owner.
Absolutely. And for those businesses that were already struggling, this could be the final blow. It's a tough reminder that natural disasters often hit the most vulnerable the hardest.
It really is. So we got a city underwater, businesses struggling, people trying to rebuild their lives. But this DNA's impact wasn't limited to just Valencia City, was it?
Nope, not at all. This thing wreaked havoc across the whole region. The Levante EMV article goes into detail about the devastation in other towns, and honestly, it's just as bad, if not worse, in some places.
Okay, let's unpack that then. What happened outside the city?
Get ready, because it's a wild ride. One of the worst hit towns was Algemesi. It's south of Valencia. The Magra River there basically turned into a raging torrent, sweeping away cars and flooding homes.
A river turning into a torrent. Sounds like some biblical level flooding.
It really was. And it wasn't just Algemesi. Further down the coast in Calera, the Zucker River overflowed too. That's a major waterway in the region. It forced evacuations in a bunch of areas.
Two major rivers overflowing. Sounds like the whole region was underwater.
Pretty much, yeah. And if you think that's bad, listen to what happened in Guadassuar. It's a town further inland. The article describes it as incommunicable, power's out, roads are closed, and there's damage everywhere.
Incommunicable. That sounds like something out of a movie.
It's as bad as it sounds. And even in areas that weren't hit directly, there's a ton of anxiety. The article mentions Villarreal. Residents there are watching the Serrat Velat Dam. They're worried it might overflow.
Oh, I can't even imagine the stress of living downstream from a dam that's threatening to burst.
Yeah, it's a terrifying thought. It really shows you how vulnerable our infrastructure is to these extreme weather events.
Wow, so much to take in. We've gone from flooded highways to overflowing rivers to a potential dam disaster.
And that's just the tip of the iceberg.
Okay, well, before we move on to those other towns, let's take a minute to talk about the people who got caught in the middle of all this.
Yeah.
I want to hear more about those stories of resilience, those everyday heroes that came out of this chaos.
That's a great idea. Those personal stories are really what bring this disaster to life. They remind us of the human cost of these events. All right, so let's go back to that couple who had to scramble up onto that gas station roof. The Levante EMV article really went deep into their story. They were driving back from Valencia to Zativa when the sky just opened up.
Oh, I bet. It was insane. I read about them, too. It's like a scene straight out of a movie. The article said they were stuck up there with 15 other people, right?
Yep, 15 other people in the exact same situation. Totally surrounded by rising water. Can you imagine the panic? Must felt like the end of the world. The article said they had to make a tough choice. Ditch the car and make a run for it, or stay put and hope for the best.
Ditch the car.
Yeah.
In that kind of flood, I wouldn't even know where to start.
Yeah, talk about a split-second decision, a terrifying one. But in a flash flood like that, you gotta move fast. Cars get swept away like toys, and if you're trapped inside, it can be deadly.
So they abandoned the car and ended up on top of a gas station.
That's right, they climbed up there with a bunch of other people just desperate for safety. Must have been terrifying, clinging to that roof with the water swirling around them.
And then, bam, they're rescued by Parks and Gardens workers.
Yeah.
It's like something out of a movie. What are the odds? Did the article say what those workers were even doing up there?
I know, right? It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
The article didn't say why they were up there. But hey, maybe they were the real heroes all along, just waiting for their chance to shine.
Talk about being in the right place at the right time. For real. I bet that couple sent those Parks and Gardens guys a massive thank you basket. It really makes you think, though, what if they hadn't been there? What if those people on the roof hadn't been so lucky?
That's the scary part, yeah. Your survival shouldn't come down to luck and a natural disaster. It really underscores the importance of being prepared, knowing what to do when these things happen.
Absolutely. Like having a plan, knowing your evacuation routes, understanding how dangerous flash floods can be.
Exactly. And it's not just about being physically prepared, it's about being mentally prepared too. Being able to deal with the emotional trauma of a disaster.
That's so true. It's not something you think about right away. Speaking of emotional trauma, the Levante EMV article also talked about La Carrera del Basket. That sports complex in Valencia, they turned into a huge emergency shelter.
Right.
They've got like 130 people there, mostly from those towns in Lorda Sud. I can't even imagine what they've been through. It must be so overwhelming to lose everything and have to rely on the kindness of strangers like that.
I know, it's heartbreaking. The article really paints this picture of fear and exhaustion, just this immense sense of loss. But even in the midst of all that, there's this amazing sense of community and support. You've got volunteers working around the clock, making sure people have food, offering comfort, a shoulder to cry on. It's really inspiring.
It's amazing how, even the worst situations, People find a way to help each other out. There's that human kindness again, it always shines through.
Yeah.
But even with all the support in the world, it's got to be tough to rebuild your life after something like this, especially with the economic devastation this DNA has caused.
You're right. The economic impact is huge. The article had some pretty sobering details about that. Remember Diego Roma, the guy from FIPEVL, the Federation of Business Parks?
Yeah, yeah.
He said businesses in the industrial parks are looking at massive losses, like really massive.
Yeah, I remember. He said a lot of them couldn't even get to their properties to assess the damage because of the flooding.
Exactly. It's a nightmare scenario, especially for smaller businesses. This could be the final straw. They might not have the resources to recover from something like this.
It's tragic. You lose your home, your community is devastated, and then your livelihood gets ripped away too.
Absolutely. It's a vicious cycle. It really underscores how natural disasters often just make the gap between the rich and the poor even wider. The people who are already struggling are usually the ones hit the hardest by events like this.
It's a harsh reality, for sure. So we've talked about Valencia City, the flooded highways, the human stories, but this DNA was like a monster. It just kept rampaging across the region, didn't it?
It did. It was relentless. This wasn't just a Valencia City problem. This was a whole region in crisis. The Levante EMV article had these really vivid descriptions of what happened in other towns.
Okay, well, spill the tea. I want to hear about these other towns and the challenges they faced. What happened out there?
All right, get this. Algemesí, that town we talked about earlier, was practically submerged. The Magro River, which usually just kind of meanders through the town, turned into a raging beast, flooding streets, homes, everything in its path.
Oh, man, I read they even lost cars in the flood, like swept away by the current, gone forever.
Yeah, cars, debris, furniture, you name it. It was like a scene straight out of a disaster movie. It really shows you the raw power of nature and how quickly things can go from bad to worse during a flood.
Absolutely terrifying, but also kind of fascinating in a morbid way.
Huh.
So what about Calera? That coastal town got hit pretty hard too, right?
Oh yeah, Calera was pure chaos. The Zúcar River, which is this massive waterway that flows through the whole region, basically burst its banks. It caused evacuations and widespread damage. It was a mess.
Two major rivers overflowing. This DNA really added up for the waterways, huh?
It did, for sure. It really makes you think about how important flood control measures are, you know? Levees, dams, floodplains, that kind of stuff. Investing in those things can make a huge difference when it comes to protecting communities from floods.
That's true, but it's not just about building bigger and stronger walls. It's about understanding how rainfall patterns are changing, adapting our cities, making sure we're not putting people in harm's way.
You got it. We can't just keep reacting to these events after they happen. We need to be proactive. We need to think about the long-term consequences of how we develop our cities.
Well said. Now remind me, what happened in Guadalajara again? That was the town that was totally cut off from the world, right?
Oh, yeah. Guadalajara was a disaster. The article described it as incommunicable, power outages, road closures, just complete devastation. Like they were totally isolated from the outside world.
Incommunicable. That's chilling, man. No power, no way to contact anyone, surrounded by destruction. Doesn't get much worse than that.
It really highlights how important it is to have backup plans. Things like alternative power sources, communication plans, strong community networks that can step in when things go wrong.
It's like that saying, hope for the best, prepare for the worst.
Exactly. And speaking of the worst, remember that dam in Villarreal?
Oh yeah, the Serrat Valad Dam, the one that had everyone on edge. What happened there? Did it burst?
Thankfully, no, it held.
Huh?
No dam breach, no catastrophic flooding. But the article said residents were on pins and needles the whole time, watching the water levels rise, wondering if that was going to be it, you know?
Oh, I can imagine that must have been incredibly stressful. It's like a ticking time bomb just waiting to explode.
It really puts the importance of dam safety into perspective. Regular inspections, maintenance, emergency action plans, all of that is crucial. You can't just cross your fingers and hope for the best when you're dealing with structures that hold back that much water.
No kidding. So we've got a pretty bleak picture here. Flooding cities, overflowing rivers, a dam threatening to burst. It's enough to make you want to curl up in a ball and hide.
I hear you. It's overwhelming to think about the scale of the damage and the long road to recovery that lies ahead.
But even in the darkest times, there's always hope, right?
Absolutely, there's always hope. And speaking of hope, let's circle back to those stories of human resilience that we talked about earlier, because those are the stories that really matter, the ones that remind us of the incredible strength of the human spirit to overcome even the toughest challenges.
So we've talked about the devastation, the economic impact, the infrastructure problems,
Hmm.
but let's shift gears a little bit and focus on the positive stuff. What were some of the stories of, resilience that really stood out to you in the Levante EMV article?
It's easy to get caught up in all the bad stuff when you're talking about a disaster like this, but what always gets me is how people always find a way to help each other, even when things are at their worst. Like, remember those Parks and Gardens workers who rescued that couple from the gas station roof? Talk about going above and beyond.
Seriously, those guys are heroes. They deserve a medal or something. And what about the folks at La Carrera del Basket? Turning a sports complex into an emergency shelter? That takes a lot of heart.
Right. And it wasn't just about giving people a place to sleep and some food. It was about creating this sense of community, a place where people could feel safe and supported while they try to put their lives back together. The article talked about all these volunteers working their butts off, offering comfort, sharing stories, just being there for each other.
It's like that Mr. Rogers quote, look for the helpers. You'll always find people who are helping.
So true.
But even with all the helpers in the world, this recovery is going to be a long and tough road.
It is, yeah. And it's not just about rebuilding homes and businesses. It's about addressing the things that made this disaster so bad in the first place.
Okay, so let's talk about solutions. What can we do to prevent something like this from happening again? What are the takeaways here?
Well, we can't ignore the big one, climate change. These extreme weather events are becoming more common, more intense, and we got to be ready for them.
So investing in better infrastructure, better early warning systems, maybe even rethinking how we build our cities.
Exactly. We need to move away from just reacting to these events. We need to be proactive. We need to start thinking about climate change in everything we do.
That's a big ask, but it also feels kind of empowering. Like we're not just helpless victims, we can actually do something about it.
That's the spirit. And it's not just about big policy changes either. Individuals and communities can take action too.
Okay, so what can I do as a regular person to be more prepared for the next big storm?
Simple stuff, really. Have a go bag ready with essentials like water, food, a flashlight, that sort of thing. Know your evacuation route, check your insurance, and most importantly, get involved in your community.
Community involvement, how does that help with disaster preparedness?
Think about it. Strong communities are resilient communities. When people know each other, they look out for each other. They share information, they share resources, they support each other. They're much better equipped to handle whatever comes their way.
So it's about building those connections now, before disaster strikes.
Exactly. And it's about using your voice to advocate for change. Demand that your elected officials take climate action seriously. Push for sustainable development. Hold the people in power accountable.
Because ultimately, this isn't just about surviving the next DNA, right? It's about building a more sustainable, more resilient future for everyone.
You nailed it. It's about taking action individually and collectively to create a world where these kinds of disasters are less frequent
Okay.
and less devastating.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So as we wrap up our deep dive into this heartbreaking event, what's the one thing you want our listeners to take away from all of this?
Don't get lost in the doom and gloom. Focus on the stories of resilience, the acts of kindness, the power of community. And remember, we all have a part to play in building a better future.
It's not about despair, it's about action. It's about learning from this tragedy
Uh-huh.
and using that knowledge to build a more resilient world.
Well,
Thanks for joining us on this, heavy but ultimately hopeful deep dive. Until next time, stay safe, stay informed, and stay engaged.